evils of smoking. So he says that smoking is something which the Yetzer Hara created this temptation in order to entrap people in it. That's what he says. He says that in order to entrap people in the sin of wasting time and money and energies and not having any time left to study Torah, and not having any money left to use it on good things. He says, because we see many different Chofetz Chaim writes, you see many times that people, that they get into the habit of smoking, and then they don't have any cigarette, or whatever, the equivalent in Radin, I don't know if they had, the modern day cigarettes, whatever, they roll their own, they roll their own cigarettes. But they're out of cigarette paper, he says, papyrus. They ran out of cigarette paper, they ran out of tobacco, and they go crazy, the Chofetz Chaim says. They can't just move on, they have to do whatever it takes, they have to go far and wide searching to find, if they don't have money, they have to get a hold of the money. It's very interesting how the Chofetz Chaim really describes this habit of the addict, already writing 100 years ago, and he says that, you see, it disturbs a person's the whole life is on hold until you're able to get the tobacco and the cigarette paper and roll yourself a cigarette to get yourself the money, and people waste their money on it, he says, and they waste their time on it, and he says that in his opinion, what's the permit for that? We can't permit something. He doesn't know that. He doesn't say explicitly that something is an isur, but he says if you look over the course of the year, how many hours you spent on this cigarette habit of yours, and how much money you spent on it, look at the time you wasted, time that could have been spent on Torah. Then he says, and I know very well, Yodati gam Yodati, I know very well what the smoker is going to respond to this. This is what he said writing 100 years ago. They're going to answer, Anusim Hadinu, that we are actually coerced. We're coerced by our habit. Because we were unable to refrain. We couldn't. We were stuck with the habit. We were addicted. However, whatever they thought of it in the 1900 Radin, we were addicted to it. But the question is, says the Chofetz Chaim, Hashe Elohi, who caused you to be coerced into it? Mi goram lochem this ones. Haloi atem ba'atzmechem. You yourself created this habit of yours. Geramtem lozeh. If you hadn't accustomed yourself to smoking, you wouldn't have had the problem, and it would be very easy to not smoke. And now you're stuck. So the Chofetz Chaim says that certainly, when the Almighty is, it concludes with the same thinking, that the Almighty is going to hold you to account when you finish your years of life in this world. Certainly He's going to demand of you all the time that you wasted and all the energies that you wasted on this habit of yours, and you won't be able to have that defense. It won't work. We were coerced, we couldn't do anything about it. We were stuck. Because you yourself created the situation with your own hand. So the Chofetz Chaim doesn't use the word isur in this context, but the other one he does actually. But it's just a very interesting thing how you look at the different writings of the Chofetz Chaim, and really in a nutshell, the Chofetz Chaim foreshadowed really all the later talk that was going to come, 70, 80 years later on, is really all discussed by the Chofetz Chaim. Now, in 1964, the Surgeon General came out with his report that smoking is dangerous for you. Until then, again, interestingly enough, even though Chofetz Chaim wrote this, it does not seem that people paid all that much heed. These were lesser-known works of his. I don't know if it was well-known that he had written this, but smoking was very, very, very common, of course, and it was widely practiced without any question. In 1964, the Surgeon General came out with a report, and the same year, Moshe Feinstein, who was the leading posek in America and certainly one of the greatest in the world, was asked the question of whether it's halachically permitted to smoke or not. So that was the question that was addressed to Rav Moshe. In the next 15 years or so after that, between 1964 and the early 80s, the question was asked of many of the world's leading poskim, and the truth is that almost all of them permitted it at that time. They said that it's not a good thing to do, and it's not good, and it's bad, and it's bad for you, etc. But to say that the halacha actually forbids it, the poskim stopped short of forbidding it. Why? It's a dangerous practice, and it's something which could put your life in danger. And what happened to this? The verse in the Torah, so the answer to that is based upon a Gemara in Masechta Yevamos. The Gemara over there gives a rule about certain types of, quote, dangerous, end quote, practices that the halacha permits. And the Gemara gives a rule without elaborating that much on the parameters of the rule. But this rule is something which is widely discussed in contemporary times to figure out which practices are permitted and which are prohibited. The Gemara talks over there in Yevamos about certain types of weather conditions under which the Talmud states that it might be injurious or dangerous to the child to undergo a bris, a circumcision. So the Gemara says that if there's clouds and no wind that day, and there's no air, so that could cause the wound to not properly heal. Or the Gemara says that there's a south wind. A south wind in the Middle East, in those conditions, was considered to also be a kind of a harsh wind, and also would somehow stop the wound of the circumcision of the bris milah from healing, and what might happen. And therefore, perhaps, arguably, we should say that if you have a child who's born at the 8th day, time for the bris, maybe you have to check out the weather conditions. You lick your finger and find out which way the wind is blowing, and see if there is any wind, and maybe if the climate conditions are wrong, we have to push it off. Again, that's a specific scenario in the Talmud. There's another scenario the Talmud gives, but the Gemara uses this to speak of a general principle of the law, which is called by the word, based on a pasuk in a verse in Tehillim and Psalms that we speak of on Shabbos, Shomer Pesoyim Hashem. That means that Hashem, the literal translation is that Hashem watches over the fools, although perhaps Pesi is not best translated as fool. Pesi is something of a compromise word between a fool and an innocent person. A person who is innocent, in other words, that doesn't have a cognizance of the implications of his behavior, of his conduct. That's what a Pesi is. So Hashem watches over the Pesi. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's a very interesting idea, but the Talmud speaks of this without precisely defining what the general idea is that's being spoken of. But from the context in the Talmud, in a couple of passages there, the way it's elaborated on by the commentaries, there is a basic idea that's discussed, which is the following: that if you have a practice which is, so to speak, universally done, or universally accepted, widespread acceptance that everyone does this thing, then, at least under certain conditions, we would be able to look aside from the danger element of it, because it's practiced by everybody. Interestingly enough, just to bring out the point, when airplane travel started to become common, some poskim were asked the question whether it's permitted to fly on planes. Right? Because there's a certain element of danger. Now, that depends on how you look at it. The airplane industry has these statistics. They claim it's safer than driving, at least if you compare it to the number of miles that you fly on planes, the number of miles driving. Whatever it is, the question was asked of the poskim. There's an element of flying that's dangerous. Maybe it should be also. The truth of the matter is, some have questioned whether it's permitted to drive a car also. It's very dangerous to drive a car. We just do it all the time. But theoretically, we should just walk everywhere. You want to go to New York, just walk. It's a lot safer. You drive a car, you hear all the time. People get into collisions, accidents. You could ask the question. It's a valid question. It has been asked. What's the heter to drive a car? Why is it permitted? Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, my Rebbe in the Arizal Yeshiva, once told me that one could ask the question, what's the heter to cross a busy street? You look 2 ways and you cross. Who says you looked? It's very nice. So sometimes the car is coming, it's rounding the corner quickly, and you don't notice it. It could get killed crossing the street. People do get killed crossing streets, right? So maybe it should be also you have to spend your whole life on this side of the street. Like the chicken, the chicken, why do you cross the road? You can't cross the road. You have to spend. So in other words, where is the boundary line? This is the question. And interestingly enough, this is what Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg told me, and others have said this also. The sefer called the Chelkas Yaakov from Reich of Switzerland, the well-known posek, that they said that the only reason why it's permitted to drive, or why it's permitted to fly in planes, is all because of Shomer Psoyim Hashem. In other words, that really arguably we would say, well, it's dangerous, don't do it. And it is dangerous to drive cars. We just sort of ignore the danger. But yeah, sure it's dangerous. People get killed. But the reason it's permitted is because of a universally accepted practice, and if it has a relatively low level of danger, that's an important point we have to talk about, a low level of danger, it's a reasonably low level, and it's universally practiced, or very, very widely accepted as a practice, and therefore, the halacha would accept it based on this concept that it's better than using the word fool, it's better to say the innocent. The Almighty watches over the innocent. I don't mean innocent in the sense of the innocent and not guilty. Innocent in the sense of those who are just going about their daily life and they don't know, they don't have constant printouts of all the danger nor every single experience that they're doing in life. They just live life as a normal person. So the Almighty watches over them. That's called Shomer Pesoyim Hashem. That's why you're allowed to cross the street. That's why you could drive a car, etc., etc., etc. That's why all these modern day activities are all considered to be permitted. So then you have to know. It's a question. What are the parameters of this heter of Shomer Psoyim Hashem? How far, how broad does it encompass? And we have to know that because maybe it encompasses things like smoking. Maybe it encompasses things like smoking 45 years ago when the Surgeon General discussed it. Maybe theoretically, maybe you could even apply today. You know, people, in those days, people smoked